So firstly, we have Lisa Kono. She is a fashion designer based in Amsterdam, and she walks a bit of a different path in fashion and works on projects that use design to tell relevant stories, socially relevant stories, I could say. She started in 2015 by making collections from textile waste that made statements about the unethical habits of the fashion industry. Filmmaking became a place for her to express narratives through fashion. And Lisa was actually in charge of fashion and concept for the Goodwill Dumping documentary that we just saw. Our second speaker of the night is Jonna Hagblom. And Jonna is the Circular Design Strategy Lead at Circular.Fashion, which is a sustainable change agency creating product and system innovation for a circular economy in fashion and textiles. She has a bachelor degree in business and economics and a master's degree in sustainable fashion. She has experience working in the fashion industry for brands with a strong focus on sustainability, such as Kerber and Flip K. Since 2017, she's working for the fashion agency, the consulting agency Circular Fashion, where she heads the development of the platform and its circular design tools. And lastly, our third speaker is Dr. Natasha van der Velden, and she is a researcher at the Faculty of Industrial Design Engineering at TU Delft. She has experience working in the fashion and graphical industry, and currently she's researching sustainability of textiles. She also teaches eco-design and LCSA, so Life Cycle Sustainability Assessment of Textiles, Products, and Service Systems. We're going to now ask some questions, switching between general questions for all speakers and one directed at a specific speaker. And I would like to say to all our speakers that you are allowed to follow up, even if the question is not for you after the person finishes up. Also, in case there was anything you'd like to add to your introduction, feel free to do so. Or if I messed up any information, please correct us. And shall we begin? Okay, I'm gonna begin with our first general question. And this is good since we just saw the documentary. So this is addressed at all of our three speakers. So relating to goodwill dumping and the general topic, do you consider the practice of donating clothes a sustainable and/or effective solution to the problem of textile waste? And if so, why? So you guys are allowed to take the floor right now.
Should I start? Sorry, I can't see all the other speakers' faces. I don't know if they were ready to start, but I'll start. And I mean, my general opinion is that it's definitely better than sending them straight to landfill. But obviously, as we saw, it also leads to sustainability issues. So I don't think there's like a clear-cut answer. But yeah, on the one hand, like the best thing you can do to cut waste and reduce like overconsumption is of course to use pieces for longer, like be it from your own wardrobe or like secondhand clothing. But I think that, and as we saw, like clothing donation in like many European countries just far outweighs the demand for it. So it leads to this whole secondhand resell industry that lacks so much transparency, can hurt local economies and like native textile businesses. And just one more comment, but I also think that it gives this full hope of like doing a sustainable act, and then in some ways can kind of lead to a false feeling of like either this or now I can repurchase something new to fill that gap. So I think there's also like a little bit risk of like greenifying your actions with that somehow.
Yeah, Lisa or Natasha, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with Jonna completely. And the one thing I would like to add is that the last thing that she said, I think, is very true. And we should kind of look at textile not as donation, but as just recycling, and see it as the same way that we see plastic when we recycle it. So when you're recycling a big, large chunk of plastic, you are glad that you're recycling it and not just putting it with the rest of your trash, but you're not proud of giving it away. You do feel kind of also ashamed of, Jesus, look at how much plastic I'm consuming. And I think that should kind of be the same emotional narrative for donating clothes. So not donating, but recycling.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, with you too as well. And I think the term donation is not at place anymore. Maybe it was, yeah, at the 1950s of the last century. Then it was donation, and then you gave your clothing to the Salvation Army, who gave it then to poor people. But the concept now has completely changed, but the system didn't change yeah, that much. So yeah, I think a lot has to happen, changing the system, the way we collect clothing, and also the way, of course, we recycle clothing. And of course, you have to consider it as waste. So you only waste and you cannot use it. And that's a bit strange that people think they donate their clothing for other people to use. And also, for example, this Burberry piece, it's really strange that it's donated and then somebody else makes money out of it in the shop. So yeah, the system is not correct anymore. So I think we have to rethink that. But of course, when you want to throw away your clothing, then don't throw it in the trash bin, but then bring it or hand it into a clothing collector. That's the best way, of course.
Thank you. The next question is actually directed at Lisa. Since you worked on the documentary, what was the most eye-opening lesson you learned from being involved in it?
I think when we did 2 trips to Kenya for the research of the movie. So me and the director talked about making this movie for a long time, because we saw a lot of articles about how this textile waste and these donations were not welcome anymore in countries like Kenya or Tanzania and Rwanda, and that the government was making laws to ban the import of European secondhand clothing. So we were a little bit more expecting a bit more of a black and white answer to it being a bad thing, because they were also in the articles that we read here in Europe, they all seem to say that they weren't they didn't want our textile anymore. But coming there and seeing the markets and everything, we realized how complex the situation is. So I think that's the most eye-opening thing, is that it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing in itself, but it's just grown so complicated. So I think I do think it is a system that should not be there anymore. But now so many people have become economically dependent on it, that you cannot just pull the plug out of an economy like that, because if you would just stop the import from secondhand clothes, the economy would collapse there. So I think a ban is not good, and nobody donating their clothes anymore isn't good either. But I think in about 30 years, we created this kind of monster there, this industry, and it started in a good way because the clothing was still also qualitatively good, and it became more and it became worse quality. So I think then there's also responsibility from the companies who are trading in this product to slowly pull away, and not pull away at once, and also the people who are donating, but find a way to kind of slowly make a shift that people can stop being dependent on this Western clothing, but not all at once. I think that's the biggest lesson from visiting and talking to the tailors and to the people in the market. And just also the scale of it. I think you can read about it and you can see, but when you are there, it is truly staggering how big those markets are, because they are endless, and it's like a whole town that is all about jeans, and then a whole town that is all about knitwear, and a whole town that is all about just sneakers. And there's a big square where they try to put all the shoes together again because people don't tie them. So then there's a square where there's just people working, and it's huge, where they're just trying to put the shoes that are matching together again. So that's then a whole industry on its own. So it's insane how big the scale of it all is when you see it with your own eyes.
Thank you. That's honestly, the complexity of the issue became evidently clear in the documentary, but I bet it was even more mind-blowing once you were there yourself. The next question we have is for Jonna, and it was that, what has been your experience with the fashion industry and now in transitioning into more circular fashion?
Yeah, I think there's like definitely like a strong and growing interest, and like I haven't even worked in the fashion industry that many years. Like I'm still pretty newly graduated, but it's still crazy how the interests have grown, and how it's like in many ways also become like a marketing kind of thing that brands need to catch up on. So in terms of like interest, it's expanded for circularity, and also in terms of just like technological innovations and like fiber innovations, it's also really interesting to follow and see like recycling technologies. So I think there's a lot happening. I still think there's a long way to go. I think that the infrastructure is not there fully. Like how we define like a circular garment is that we work very much in the design phase with brands. So we see like, how do you put a garment together that can circulate, that can be reused or recycled at end of life? So already have that in mind, but also how do you ensure that the system is actually there it recycles. So like a circular product is not circular if it can't circulate somehow. And I think that's like the core challenge of the industry today, that infrastructure or those systems are not like fully thought through. And I mean, that also like the secondhand industry is such a clear like symptom of that, like of overproduction, overconsumption, that has that like clear massive amount of like wasted textiles at the end. So I think there's busters happening, but there's still a way to go, a long way to go.
Thank you. Next one is for Natasha, and it's, since you've been researching the sustainability of textiles and like products, service systems, what makes textiles and fashion like sustainable, or what can make them sustainable from a very technical or more technical point of view?
Okay, that's a
very small question, very simple.
You can write a PhD thesis about. So, but there's not just one answer, and there's not just one the most sustainable material. It's always a combination of what is the purpose or the functionality of the product, and then the combination of the material you choose for it and the way you produce it, and of course how it's used and becomes waste in the end. So it's not really easy to give a one-way answer, but since my expertise is on life cycle assessment, and I'm not sure if everybody knows what life cycle assessment is, but this is a method to measure the environmental impact, and this can be of products, of materials, of systems, but it's a standardized method to calculate the environmental impact. And you can do this in several indicators. And I use the indicator, the eco costs. And well, actually, the definition I use is a product is sustainable when the eco costs are as low as possible, and preferably then be zero. And then I can give you an example. A thing I found out during my PhD was that a knitted textile, and knitting is the way a t-shirt is produced. Knitting was a much more environmental friendly process than weaving. And weaving is the process for the men's shirt or for the sheets on your beds. That's how weaving is done. And when you know these kind of things, then it's much easier to make decisions on sustainability of textiles. So what I advocated in my PhD was that designers should include these kind of LCA calculations in their design decisions. And actually what they then should do is do eco-design. And I just heard Jonna talking about eco-design also. And now it looks like it's something new, but actually it's not, because it was already there in the 1970s. And actually what the key to everything is apply this eco-design method, which is already there for so many years, but it hasn't been applied enough and well enough. And that's why we are now in this system. And so maybe it's a part of the answer, but it's not so easy to give a one-way answer.
Jonna, you can go.
No, I just wanted to add to that, because I think I completely agree. Like, so many brands that we work with are expecting, like, is this more sustainable than that? Should I choose this for that? And it's really hard to give a clear-cut answer. And I think in terms of like where the industry is heading, in terms of like circular design, there's also more of an openness towards like certain design strategies are applicable to certain garments. And we are very much like promoting that kind of like designing for the optimal use phase. So if it is a sock or whatever non-emotional garment that you wear, then maybe it's not it's just about finding ways of like applying like correct materials to garments that you want to last for a very long time, and applying maybe compostable materials to garments that should last a short time. So I think there's like a lot of like exploration in terms of design there. And and just there's also where I find like circular design and like circular economy very exciting, because it kind of opens up that framework of there's not a one size fits all, and it doesn't have to be, but it just have to be like more diverse ways of designing garments and like selling, retailing garments.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm very impressed with such a, wide question, how well you were able to say something to that. And on the chat, I noticed that Esther pointed out that not only does one have to take into account the fabric, but also the production, not just the production process of the fabric, but also, goes to also the fabric itself. So again, how, showing us how complex the whole process is and how we have to take into account all the smaller steps. The next question was for everyone, and it originally was that should we incentivize the donation, but as it was brought up by the speakers earlier on, maybe we should moreover refer to it as recycling of clothes. but should we incentivize it, or is there a danger that it allows people to ignore changing their current consumption patterns? And like, I think it was Jonna said, she was talking about this emotional narrative that comes with, and this kind of fall hope and greenifying of the feeling you get when you kind of recycle a piece of clothing. So what do you think? Should we incentivize it, or is there a danger that that allows people to completely ignore kind of putting more thought into the way they consume?
Maybe I can make a start with some answer. As you heard in the documentary, there are a few problems. One of the problems is that the quality is becoming less. That's a problem. So when over there they cannot sell the clothing anymore, it ends in landfill. So that's one of the problems. As long as the quality of the clothing is becoming lower, then this landfill will grow. So that's one problem. And on the other hand, we should prevent people here to not hand in their old clothing. So in that sense, I think you should incentivize and make clear to people that they don't just throw it away, but hand it in the clothing bin. So that's really important. And on the other hand, we need somehow to raise the quality of the clothing. So those are two things I think that should happen in the first place. And then there's another thing. What you now see is that a lot of designers they are trying to collect clothing, or they starting projects to collect clothing, for example, at schools, at children's schools, and then they make a game out of it. And then I thought, okay, that's maybe a bit weird to award the handing in of clothing. So because when children want to have this prize, then they maybe collect more than that's really useful to use as waste. So that was another thing that came to my mind. Because I encountered a few of those projects at schools, which I think is great, because children need to learn about this subject. But but I'm curious what you think of it.
Yeah, I was going to add, if that's okay, also that I think it's good to encourage people to recycle, but I do think in the end the most important thing is to encourage people to buy less clothing and to buy better clothing, because all this focus on recycle also in design, I think, is putting a bandage over a broken system. And I think we should always look at the core of the problem and not at it's like you're trying to fix something at the end of the problem and not at the beginning and the source of the problem. So I think we should encourage people to recycle and to make that more kind of something personal and less anonymous, where you just put it in a bin and you don't know where it goes to. But in the end, I think the most important thing isn't even really to make people want to recycle, but to make people make people buy less. I think should be the main focus.
Yeah, I completely agree on this, like symptom solving discussions instead of like getting to the root cause. But in terms of incentives, I think they are efficient today, and I think it has proven for companies efficient. So I still think there are value in that, and I would just love if it could move from like monetary incentives to like more emotional, or like storytelling, or like what happens to the garment, instead of like getting a voucher or a discount code or something like that. But I still think some kind of incentive is just sufficient in the industry for that. But I also agree, I also see questions in the chat that also wishes to tackle more on like the root cause of the broken system, rather than this like how to handle the waste at the end. So I don't know if I can just answer to that, like how we envision that when we, so when we work on, so we work on two ends. We work a lot on the design phase. We also work a lot on like ensuring that a garment actually, like we work, the software has a circularity ID, and that is a digital tag that's integrated into a garment. So if a designer has designed a garment with us, they can receive that kind of tag, and then that opens up a talking point to one's customer. So there are different points in where you can engage the customer to reuse the clothing, to use them longer, how to take care of the clothing. But in terms of like the very beginning in design, we focus like equally as much on like the technological changes that a designer has to do just to enable the recycling, but also like design strategies for longevity, for emotional durability, for physical durability. How do you really tackle like what kind of strategies can you use in design to just give users more interest in keeping them for longer? And we have different, like there are practical examples are like choosing materials that age beautifully over time, like denim is a clear example. Like, you see how you sit and how you use them, you see on your knees like where they have like losing the word, but how they have kind of faded over time. Same with leather. There are also like interesting like business models in terms of how can you design clothing that you can update over time. For example, like you can come back to the store and re-dye it into a new color. So I'm really, really hoping for the industry to adopt to more of those like kind of circular retail models as well.
Natasha, you can take over again.
Yeah, Jonna, thank you. And it's very interesting how you, how you try to integrate all these. Yeah, I think it are design ideas, and it's just a kind of personal question, because I have two teenage daughters, and 2 years ago they only had skinny jeans. But there's no way that I can make them wear skinny jeans anymore these days. I think you can imagine. And how do you then foresee, or that by means of this digital idea or whatever, to convince them to wear this skinny jeans again?
Yeah, I think the digital ID is promising in terms of like saving material, technical data that you need to like recycle a garment on a certain level. But in terms of engaging customers, I think there's, for example, if you would have, if the brand themselves would have like a re-sewing station where they could actually take out skinny jeans and like insert a slit or something that would make them a straight or a bootcut jeans. So I think
that's their mother. That's their mother doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think with these trend-driven,
yeah.
I guess rental is also like a nice option for those kind of trend-driven pieces that you just want for a couple of months or like a couple of years.
Yeah, I really hope it will work. But, yeah, actually, I'm not sure, but yeah, we have to see. And of course, all initiatives are nice and good, and but we have to think them through, and not over 20 years look back again and say to ourselves, well, this wasn't it, because we don't have so much time anymore to change it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's for the recycling also, because I think sometimes we now try to recycle too much and recycle things into a too high level, at a too higher level, that it doesn't make sense anymore, and that you then maybe better can decide to do something else with it, but not recycle it into a new pair of jeans. maybe then make it into a blanket or something else. So, and therefore, I really think we need LCA calculations for all the things we think of. Yeah, to confirm whether we are doing good or bad, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think definitely like LCAs is brilliant also in customer communication. Like there are brands that have started to show more of that.
Yeah.
I just, yeah, I don't know, I'm still like pretty hopeful that these new ways of like engaging with fashion, and maybe it doesn't need to be ownership, but it can be like I can access it for a couple of weeks. I'm still hopeful that really takes off, and that it suits for like some specific product types.
Yeah, I am wondering about the audience. I do have a question for the audience. Is that possible? Because what do they think about rental, or yeah, about the library, or yeah, I if anyone would like to share their thoughts on that.
Yeah, so anyone interested in like explaining what they think about fashion libraries, borrowing clothes, swapping clothes, you can also write in the chat. Do you find that a norm in your consumption patterns, or is that more foreign to you? Would you be interested in trying that?
Yeah,
You
would
can.
be nice to know what you think. Yes.
I would like to add also that I think we don't need really even, I think if we look at new systems, something hopeful can be new technologies that are more sustainable in the way we produce clothes. But also I think we don't even need to invent a new system. I think there's a lot to learn just from the old system when there was no high street fashion yet, and when in the 50s, and if we look at our grandmothers, and there was a way of handling and buying clothing that was still very much about fashion and about changing and about wearing something you want and then renewing it and being of the time, but was a lot less fast and a lot less, with a lot more attention to it. And also exactly like they didn't call it recycling then, because it was just about being zuinig. Yeah, so it's the same. I think we don't even need to invent something new. The knowledge is already there. I think you just have to kind of get rid of this beast of fast fashion and the speed at which we want something new. I think wanting something new is the appeal of fashion, and I don't think that will ever go away, and I don't think it has to go away. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to want something new, but just maybe not that often.
I'd actually want to jump from that into a question that, although it's kind of normal that we want to wear new clothes, there is an enormous existence of textiles that have already been created. There would be plenty enough for everyone. So what do you think? Should we like shift away from like buying new clothes or materials, even if they're produced sustainably or ethically, to like decreasing the amount of textiles and clothes we're making? And furthermore, if you guys want to express, I'd be especially interested in hearing what you think with beyond the functionality of wear, what's important about the existence of fashion. Why can we defend creating new textiles, and does it overrule the issue of the existing textiles that we have? That's a very big question. So pick out what point you want. I think especially hearing your point, Lisa, would be really cool with kind of what beyond wear is important about the fashion industry and the existence of it.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier, that I think that because it is a way of showing identity and creativity, it's not something to punish people for, to want something new. And I do think we can make new fashion, but I don't think you necessarily need to make new materials for that. So I think you can make a new image without making new resources. So you can still engage in fashion and in innovation and in a different look, but not necessarily overuse and create new cotton all the time, because like or other types of materials, like you were saying, there's already so much in the world, and I don't think you need to say you can never make a new collection or have these yearning for a new type of fashion, just different resources. So I think this feeling of innovation and of wanting something new is what makes fashion appealing. And so I think no fashion designer will ever say, I mean, sometimes people say you should invest in timeless pieces, but I think like, there's not such a thing as a timeless piece. Like even a coat, a trench coat, or a black dress, you can tell from which era it is. So I think that's not really the way to go. And I think it's also not something bad to want to have something that looks new, but it doesn't have to be a new material. So yeah, I think that's, for me, that's the most important difference, that new fashion doesn't necessarily have to mean new ground material. Yeah.
Natasha, do you have to
Yes,
add to this?
I really agree. And I think we should not forget that fashion is also a very nice thing in our lives. So we shouldn't see it as, yeah, how do you say it? Yeah, I think we should become happy from fashion. We could become happy from fashion. Yeah, but then in a different way than it went over the last 30 years. And I think I agree with Lisa that, yeah, when you get a piece of clothing tailored especially for you, yeah, that's really a nice gift to get. So, but that's something completely different than going to yeah, any store, Primark, H&M, or whatever, and pick one piece of €5. And yeah, so I think there are many different ways to enjoy fashion. Yeah, so that's maybe also a nice thing. And on the other hand, fashion also made a lot of people in the world much better over the past years, and that's something we also forget many times. So let's keep that in mind. Yeah, so actually it should only make people happier and consumers, but also producers and users and the makers and the designers. So, and I think fashion is really perfect for that. Yeah.
Yana, do you want to add on?
Yeah, I mean, I agree to what has been said, but I also think it's like super relevant to bring in the topic of privilege here, and that I guess we've all grown up in like excess of clothing and possibilities to buy clothing for the price of a coffee or whatever. And I don't think that's democracy, but I also think it's also very relevant to find ways where parts of the world that have not had that kind of access are still allowed to shop fashion without a bad conscience, just because we in some countries are fed up after 30 years of fast fashion. So I think it's really relevant to bring in that perspective as well. But other than that, I agree. Like, I just hope that I also, like, we're in this crisis not because the technology doesn't exist or because the fibers doesn't exist. We're in this crisis because of behavior, and we need to change our way, like, of, yeah, it comes down to people and behavior and what we're used to, and that's what really is what we should tackle.
Jumping off that, where would you guys place the responsibility of the textile waste issue? Is it on a consumer or is it on the producer? This is a like quite, it doesn't have to be one or the other, but what do you guys think?
I used to say consumer, and like since the last 3 years, I'm just like producer. Like, the brands have the money, they have employees, they have time, like just make better products. I also, when I worked at a fashion brand working with sustainability, we were like, how do we communicate this so that our users are using it in their most responsible way? But I was thinking like, why do we have to teach consumers like make better products, make better systems? Like you have the money, we're sitting there, we're getting paid every day. So I think the majority, like the main responsibility should lie with the brands, with the producers still.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think after many years that a lot of, sorry, that after many years, at first I would also say consumers, and then it was still a new problem. And then after now, I think a lot of brands like H&M and Zara have had this news and have had the information about this and have had the chance and the money to address it and to make better choices, and they just plainly didn't. So I think, I don't believe it anymore if they say that they try to be sustainable. I do think it's there. They have so much power and so much money. If they wanted to, they could start their own factories so that they do have a full eye and responsibility on what's happening there. But they just don't want to. So I think, I do think it's because it's also the same issue as Jonna was saying, that you can't make the consumer responsible for everything, because a lot of people just don't have the money to spend more, or are not educated to, or don't have the time to educate themselves on what is the right product. And I do think those companies did have the time and the money. So, yeah.
No, but what about governments? Shouldn't they be responsible as well? Yeah, I think so. And then, so first politics, then producers, and then consumers, because you cannot ask from the consumer that he knows what he buys, or that he knows what he if a consumer if you don't buy that sweater, then your neighbor will. So the consumer will buy it anyway. And it will be bought. So I think producers are responsible, at least for quality, and politicians and governments should set the rules for a level playing field. And
agree to that. And like, with that being said, I think that everyone out of us who have the privilege enough to like think shopping decisions through and maybe have money to spend should do so. Like we are voting still with our wallet. We are consumers. We do play a role. So I think there also lies responsibility in that. If you have capacity and you have privilege enough, you should definitely do that.
I think now we're gonna conclude for now the discussion. I think some of the questions that have been sent to us are gonna bring up other points and questions in themselves. But the issue of profit in the fashion industry and the coexistence of expression and sustainability is a complex topic, but they aren't necessarily ones that exclude one another, which is really, inspiring to hear. Now we are going to address some of the questions that have been sent to us. We're going to give an opportunity for each of you who sent in a question. You can unmute your mic when I say your name, or not, and I can read it out loud for you. So the first one we have is from Maria Blom. Would you like to unmute yourself, or should I read it?
Yes, I'm over here. Hi. Well, I had a question. I think Lisa will be the one to answer it, but please interrupt if you're not. I had a question because the documentary ended at the markets, so where the clothing is sold, but then we also talked about the landfills, but is there something in between, or is there also a market built around the landfills? Because I can imagine that some people are willing to go through the landfills and also find stuff there to sell. So is there like a market after the market, so to say?
Not really. Well, yes, Well, first of all, they already divide it up into levels, so like quality levels of how to sell it. So there's already a market with the best quality and lower quality, and then the lowest of low qualities. They, of course, they don't go to the landfill if they just don't sell it, if it's been on the market for many days, or if it just has so many holes in it. And it's not really. It's not really a market because, well, their market is just to burn it or to get rid of it. But it's really hard to get in because we try to get in, but of course also with a camera crew you're not really welcome there. But we watched it, and it's kind of also a playground, so a lot of kids from the slums would try to still pick out garments from there, but they wouldn't pay for it. It's just like literally like going through the garbage. So it wasn't a market after that point anymore. Then it was just a garbage, but it was still, of course, a market in the sense that burning garbage is a market. And yeah.
Yes, thanks a lot. That clears up it. Yes, thanks.
Yes. Okay. So the next question is from Tamar Hinklet. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your last name. I can also read it for you unless you want to take the stage. Okay, well, their question was about the documentary, and in it, it was said that the quality of donated goods has gone down, and they were wondering why that is. Is it in general that the quality of clothing has decreased, or have we become more, you know, we give away stuff easier and we don't necessarily consider the quality of the pieces that we're donating?
So in the documentary, yeah, the woman who says that in the documentary, it is because of the general quality decrease when we are producing fashion. So because of the uprise of fast fashion, it dribbles down to the secondhand industry. So yeah, and also we are now not donating it. There is a part of it also that is because a lot of people, the people who do see it as recycling and not as donating, will also put in rags and things that are broken because they don't maybe see it as, like in the 80s, they would only put their best jacket in it to really give it to a person, and now it's also for this recycling purpose. So that's also the case, but yeah, mainly just because of the general decrease.
The next one is from Vanessa regarding more local secondhand clothing cycles. Vanessa, do you want to unmute, or shall I read it out loud?
Yeah, so my question is mainly about, I think that most, like we heard, that the garments that are thrown into the bins, they're very often still very good clothing. And I just wonder why so many people just throw them away, and why we don't give them to like secondhand shops directly, such that they could be resold like in locally. And also the other question is, from my experience, these secondhand shops, very often they're quite like not very much in the city center, but I think like it could be great to have these secondhand shops like next to H&M stores, for example, like to really make people more aware of it. And yeah.
Does any one of you want to take on to that? Is there anything to add? I very much agree that they should be maybe more central and like visible to everyone.
I think that's really a good idea. And I think it's already happening also, because today there was in the newspaper about the taking over of United Wardrobe by Vinted. And of course that's because secondhand is hot. Yeah, a lot of people buy and sell on these platforms, which is good. And in the same article, there was noted that more and more secondhand shops are becoming are coming in the streets. But I think it would be better if they are on A locations, of course. So yeah, that's maybe something that will happen, but it's really a good idea. Yeah. And I'm not sure what the other question was.
I think she was more just pointing out on making, which I think is a really interesting point to bring, making these recycling cycles more of local rather than global, and kind of are there benefits to that? That might be super interesting from like a life cycle point of view. Like, would it be better for us to have like a local system of recycling rather than sending our clothes elsewhere?
Yeah, in terms of secondhand clothing, I'm not sure whether the local system works. Yeah, because I think then the flow is in a too small region. So I think it will be better if the secondhand clothes will be distributed over a bigger area and maybe in a more coordinated way than just one private person bringing in their clothing to one store in the neighborhood. I think that doesn't work. But it's nice to think about how that should work, and actually, it should be done in that people really rethink how this works. Yeah.
Right. Oh, my mic is on. The next question was from Bruce. Bruce, do you want to unmute, or shall I read? It's about resale. Well, maybe I'll read it. So she was wondering, or they were wondering more over about the shift of true donation into resale, and whether, I don't know what that is, Leiden-Delft-Erasmus was involved in the change. Don can step in and explain if I'm butchering something.
I think Rose is here. Maybe she can explain it.
Yeah. So I was wondering if we know a little bit more about the shift when we went from donation to reselling the clothes in Africa. And I was wondering if the Leiden-Delft-Erasmus, which is the company in the Netherlands that collects all the donated clothes, was involved at all in this change. I'm not sure if you guys know this, but maybe you have your ideas on it.
Well, yeah, I know about the Leiden-Delft-Erasmus. They are now renting these containers. So now the system is that the Leiden-Delft-Erasmus rents these containers from the gemeente, so from the city of Amsterdam, for instance, in this case, or from Leiden. And the money that they get from renting it still goes to the Leiden-Delft-Erasmus. So that money still goes to charity. But and then so the people and then after that the clothing inside the container is sold by these big companies who are commercial companies who are getting profit from selling it to Africa and different places. But I think the shift is kind of when the zak in Holland, when it was the zak van Max, when it was just about, and you still have house shops where you can get your clothing, but as soon as these containers were on the street at the places of waste places, that's when it became no more something that was from the Leiden-Delft-Erasmus clothing wise, but just that the rent of the bins would go to the Leiden-Delft-Erasmus. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. So in a way, there's still a money that comes from the donations indirectly.
Yeah. Right? So the Leiden-Delft-Erasmus still earns money, and still, the volunteers are still getting paid, or the housing for homeless shelter is still getting paid off from the renting those.
Okay, thanks.
This kind of ties in well with the next question from Heidi. Are you here, or would you like to unmute yourself? Okay.
Oh, I can.
Oh,
sorry.
yes, awesome.
My question was, let me just scroll up. My question was if any of the donated clothes, if they do reach people directly in third world countries, or do all donations, even from other organizations, not those particular containers, do they all end up in the secondhand market in these countries? If anyone knows.
So everything that's from Symphony, from Leiden-Delft-Erasmus and Wieland goes to through these companies to the market, but there are like smaller initiatives also from individual people who just collect clothes and then bring it to people who need it, or orphanages or things like that. But everything from that is collected in the bins that are in the city all goes through these companies. They never are directly given away to someone who needs it. They're always through this selling system. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and maybe a quick question also, like the scraps that stay behind in the warehouse, so ripped clothes or stained clothes, do they still get properly recycled, or?
If it's here, yes. So the scraps that are here that are left, they get recycled into isolation material or into car fillings or into cleaning cloths.
Okay.
But the problem is that a lot of the bad quality Primark clothes, everything, they are still going to Kenya, for instance, and there they have much worse recycling systems. So then that's why it's also a problem that so much it goes into landfills there, because then the chance of it being recycled is poorer than when it's obstructed here in Netherlands.
Okay, great, thank you.
We are seeing that we are running a little bit behind on schedule, so the board would like to ask the speakers if they're okay with still staying behind and answering a few more questions. I think there's an A-okay. Anyone who still wants to stay, we're still going to go through some of the questions. Please do, but we are seeing that some people are leaving now. So we would, on the behalf of myself and my team, Camilla, Dawn, Lydia, Yonne, and Karel, we would all like to say a big thank you for showing up, both to our experts, our panelists, as well as to all of you who've been reacting in the chat, who've been watching this, and to those who are staying behind. Yeah, shameless self-promotion. Please do like our social media websites to stay in touch with what we're doing in the future. We're hopefully doing more events like these, as well as other things in different kind of areas of sustainability and circularity, going along with the themes of CFS. So yeah, in this little portion, I'm already going to say thank you in case you have to go. But I think we're now going to move to the next question, which is from Saskia. So if Saskia wants to unmute herself, she can. Okay, I think Saskia was questioning whether it is actually bad or not to make money off of clothes that someone donates. And she questioned whether it's a bit of a romanticized idea that our clothes are going to reach someone else and be worn by someone else. So in general, the topic of reselling donated clothes, is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? Should a certain amount of the profit that's made go to something else? What do you guys think?
I don't think it's a bad thing. But of course, it should be a transparent system. So, for example, it's not so good that people on the street handing in their clothing don't actually know what happens with it. On the other hand, they could know if they do a little bit research. Then, yeah, I think sometimes a lot of people just close their eyes and yeah, if they don't see it, then it's not there. Yeah, so I think it's not a bad thing. And if if you don't want to hand in your clothing in a symphony bin, then you can sell it yourself these days through Vinted or through another platform. So yeah, if you want to earn something with it, then it's possible. So why not? I think it's not a bad thing, but.
What do you think, Lisa, since you touched up on the economic dependence that some countries and economies have on donated clothes? And
Yeah, I think it's. I think I agree that it's not bad that it's that they are making money out of it. But right now, the people who are making most money out of it are still these European companies and not the sellers on the market there. So if that was the case, I think that would be better. But I still think that it's better that it's an economy, because if you would all donate it and they wouldn't make money out of it, that would be even worse situation of kind of this colonial dependency where there's no independency made, you know, because they're still, then you're still not creating any type of economy in that place, or you know, there's no chance for an own economy to grow. But now still the balance is kind of bad, because most of the sorting companies are big Chinese companies and big European companies, and not Kenyan companies, for instance. But yeah, I think there's no harm in there being profit in it.
there's a question from Vanessa. And is Vanessa gonna unmute herself? Well, her question was regarding that the production of clothes has doubled between 2000 and 2015. And isn't that an inherent problem that we should discuss as well? What do you guys think? Do you think it's not important at all?
I think we can, I guess we've touched upon that like a few times, and I think we're all agreeing that that's like a crucial challenge to tackle. Like as Lisa said, like finding these like band-aid symptom solving solutions is not core. Sorry, it's a storm outside of me if it's bad sound. I mean, yeah, I've said it before, but I definitely think it's like a crisis of behavior and not of tech solutions or recycling technologies. Like it's a crisis of how we consume, how we overconsume.
Is there anyone who would like to unmute themselves in the audience right now and take the floor to ask questions? I'm going through the chat. Please do write a note in case I've missed your name. I'm also seeing that a lot of people who ask questions are not here anymore. But we're opening now for anyone to unmute and ask anything really. Well, in that case, I can ask some questions that we had still prepared, which was something that we were wondering as the board was, what was a project that you were involved in which you felt as though you made the most impact? Doesn't necessarily need to be the largest of scales, but where you felt that what you were doing and organizing was impactful in some sense.
Was this for the speakers or the audience? Sorry.
This is for the speakers.
For me, the most, it's training, I would say. Like we do trainings. I'm heavily involved in like the circular design training we do with fashion brands. And for me, that's key. Like when you work with people, you meet with people, ideas are flooding and you just see like engagement and creativity into finding solutions. I think that's when I feel, okay, this really had an impact. So I think education, training.
What about Natasha?
Well, there are many. No, but I have more. More come to my mind, but well, I'm quite proud that my PhD thesis has been read over 2,000 times, which is not often the case with PhD theses. So that's something, what I'm proud of. And I'm not sure whether it really made an impact, but I did my graduation project also on the topic. So maybe in the introduction you said that I recently started with sustainable textiles, but that's not. I have been in this topic already for 25 years, and by then I wanted to make an LCA also, but at that time I didn't have the right the correct method, and the data weren't available, and now they were. So that was a nice history actually, that after so many years you could fulfill what you started so many years ago. So yeah, it's something nice.
And Lisa?
I guess like number wise, I think making this documentary, I think, has reached the most people because it was on Dutch television and it's still on the NPO Start website, so many people have seen it. But I think for me, because I don't really like, there's a big difference if you're a researcher or a journalist or a company, then you can have your impact more in numbers. But I think my personal contribution, or what I hope to contribute, is not really that I'm handling a certain subject, but like the tone and the manner in which I'm handling it, which I think is like the contribution of an artist or a designer in the public debate about any socially relevant issue, but in also about sustainability, that then it's kind of showing a way that it looks imaginative, or that it's makes you enthusiastic, and it's this kind of dream world with it, which I also try to do in this documentary. But so for me, it's more about how I'm doing it, and not necessarily, I guess, these numbers.
Well, we would all like to thank you guys for taking the time out of your daily lives to be here and listen to us ask questions from you and be open and share your experiences. It was really interesting to have such a variety of different perspectives. You guys are all working in the same topic of sorts, but in different aspects, and you have different roles. So that was really a rich experience for all of us who were listening. And thank you for, again, anyone who joined in. I think we will wrap it up for here today. But yes, please don't let this be the last time you join in on an event of us. And again, do check us out, as well as our speakers, although they probably don't need as much promotion as we do, as they are already more professionals that we are. But again, thank you so much on the behalf of myself and the board. We enjoyed today a lot, and it was a great success. We had over 60 people at one point tuning in, which is really great at these times. So yeah, have a great rest of your evening, and hope to see you soon.